So now we've covered all of the centres. Depending on which centres you have defined, determine which of 4 types you fall into. So first off, if you have a defined throat centre and an open sacral, you will be a manifester, and that's roughly 8% of the population. And their role, because they have a throat centre which will be connected to a motor, their role in life is to make things happen, to set the direction and tell people which way they're going. Then if you have a defined sacral, you will always be a generator. And generators make up roughly 37% of the population. And if you have a defined sacral and a defined throat, you will be a manifesting generator, which make up another 33% of the population. And if you have a defined throat centre, an undefined sacral centre, and no motor connected to the throat, you will be a projector, and that's roughly 21% of the population. And then the final 1% are reflectors, and these are people who have no centres defined at all. They are very, very rare. So each of these 4 types has a strategy that will help them to navigate through life. So if you are a manifester, your strategy is to inform people of what you are going to do. If you are a generator, you are waiting to respond to something that happens outside of you. If you are a projector, you are waiting to be invited to start to get involved in something. And finally, if you are a reflector, you are waiting. And what you'll discover when we talk about authorities is, because you have no defined centres, you have no internal authorities. So your authority is external, which will either be the environment or the moon. And as we all know, the moon has a 28-day cycle. So for a reflector, in order to start to make the right decisions when something happens, they take up to 28 days to actually figure out what the right decision for them is. So that's your strategy. And in terms of your authority, that will depend. Your authority will come from which of the centres you have defined in your chart. So even different generators can have different authorities. So they'll have the same strategy, they'll have a different authority. And that's where this really starts to get interesting for me, because you can start to see the richness and the complexity in this. And there is a hierarchy of the internal authorities, starting off with the solar plexus, which is the emotions. Secondly, if the solar plexus is not defined, then it's the sacral. If the sacral is not defined, you move on to the spleen. If the spleen is not defined, you move on to the heart. And if the heart is not defined, you move to the G centre. And the whole point of these authorities is that it's important to recognise that society tells us that the mind is in control. And the mind isn't in control. It's an incredibly powerful tool, the mind. It's there to take in the information, sort it and store it. What we do through our authorities, our inner authorities, is we make sense of that information, and then we act based on what our authority tells us. So the mind is not in control. The mind is not the authority. It's one of the other centres that I've just talked about. So in later videos, I'll talk in more depth about each of the 4 types and the authorities that they may have.